All right. Welcome. We let the kids loose, so we're not giving away any of your secrets here tonight. They won't know. They won't be on to us when we share some stuff with you. Well, tonight we're beginning a mini-series entitled Parental Guidance Needed. Not like the movie rating suggested, because we believe it's absolutely necessary and vital for us to have that kind of guidance in order to have healthy and godly families. Now, also unlike the movie rating, the content that you're going to get over the next 3 weeks is suitable for all audiences, including your entire family and our entire church family, because the principles and practices we're going to talk about will apply even beyond being parents. We got grandparents, people who are single, it may come into your life later, but it really will involve a lot of relationships throughout the church and throughout your life.
It definitely does, because a lot of grandparents and just other family members are primary caregivers today.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about kids either. These principles are going to work on up in your adult kids, even in relationships with your parents. So we trust that you're going to get something out of this tonight. I've asked my wife, Lorri, to join me for a little more of a casual kind of discussion. I'm going to do more of the talking, unlike at home. Now, honestly, she doesn't really prefer to be up here. In fact, this morning she was out at one of the tables and caught me, and she said, "Which of the pastors do marriage counseling?" And I'm kind of like, "Well, we all do, you know that." And I said, Pastor Brian, Pastor Austin did quite a bit. And she said, "Well, you're going to need some after they put my name in the announcements," because she was still looking for like a way out, just in case she didn't want to do this. So then she was stuck, and she didn't quite appreciate that. But she's not the one to be. She teaches a lot and leads a lot, but this up front thing, I don't know. So we're going to be all right. We're going to banter back and forth a little bit about our experiences as not just as parents, but as pastors. And hopefully some of the things that we share will be relevant to your situation. Now, I encourage you to take some notes. Not everything we talk about is going to maybe fit your particular situation, but if you glean even 2 or 3 things out of there, it might be something you can apply. You'll be a lot more apt to put that into practice and do something with it if you've made a note of it along the way tonight. I want to start by asking, how many of you grew up in a relatively structured household? Now, not necessarily positive or negative, but just your household had a fair amount of structure to it. How many of you are with that? All right, how many of you, and not necessarily everybody else are left, but how many of you a little more of a loose structure that may have been casual, laid back fun, or it may have been chaotic, but how many were a little more loose in your structure? All right. Now, when we become parents, some of us, whether we realize it or not, we tend to take on a similar parenting style as our parents did. Sometimes by accident, other times by osmosis, and other times, depending on how you look at your upbringing, you may make a very deliberate choice to do something different. But one of the things that I think most people have a perception is that they tend to look at parenting styles of the past or leadership styles of the past as being a little more strict and authoritarian than things are today. But we've actually found that the younger families, I think, tend to be more structured in regard to things like their schedules, diet and health, having all the right gear and all that kind of stuff. In fact, we've actually been kind of amazed and slightly amused, like with some of the younger pastors and all that, how much of a stricter regimen they seem to follow with daily routines and bedtimes and meal times and all that stuff, because honestly, we really weren't that structured in our home.
Not a whole lot. I probably was a little bit more, because I had morning routines with school and activities and daily devotions and stuff like that, so I had a little more structure.
Yeah, and that was, and you had certain things you did on certain days, and were very deliberate about that. But for the most part, we're not here to describe all kinds of creative methods that we had and activities that maybe you've heard from other speakers in this type of context. I know a few weeks ago when Scotty and Casey Gibbons were here, and Casey talked about chick chat and chocolate times with her daughters, and you hear things like that and say, well, those are pretty good ideas. I maybe should have done that. But we don't want to make everybody feel guilty. They haven't done all these things. The things we're going to talk about tonight, honestly, are going to be a little more of the mundane, the day-to-day things, the conversations you have, and regardless of your situation, your creativity, your support system, these are going to be things you can apply wherever and whatever you're doing. I mean, sitting at mealtime, drive times, just conversations along the way. Just in a second, we're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's It's going to talk about those kind of contexts in life. So go ahead and turn there to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And, yep, there we go. We love the Word of God. Now, unlike a lot of times, I'm known for lacing Scripture all over the place. We're going to visit off of one passage tonight, and we're going to talk about a lot of very practical principles rooted in biblical principle, but we're not going to read a ton of Scripture. But I want to go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. God's people are standing on the threshold of entering the Promised Land, and they just received all of God's laws and commands, and Moses here is summing up God's expectations of them in this passage. And so you don't have to listen to me quite as much. I'm going to have Lorri read our text tonight in Deuteronomy chapter 6, 1 through 8.
These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors,
now up
promised.
to this time, God laid out a lot of not a lot, but a general condition that if you live in this way and raise your families in a certain way he's going to describe in just a second, things are going to go well with you. The next part of this, very important to the ancient Jews, it was called the Shema, and this was kind of their declaration of how they saw God, but even more than that, their knowledge of what he expected them to do if they wanted to carry on a legacy of faith with their family. And a lot of very practical things here, starting in verse 4.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates.
You see a lot of real practical situations there. You're just talking about when you're doing this, you lie down, you get up, you're going along the way. Whatever you're doing, you're just talking about the things that God instilled in you. Now, this afternoon we were at a lunch and Pastor Austin talked with the people there and saying, come out tonight, and commending how we've raised our daughter and so forth, and said, kind of kidding, I'm sure, saying, I want to come and hear the secret sauce. We don't have any big secrets. I'm telling you, the most part of this you're going to get is the fact that we just discussed everything we could in every context. And every context we did that, we tied it back to somehow, this is why God expects this. This will enhance our relationship with Him. This is why He wants us to conduct ourselves with this in our relationships with other people. And we brought it back to the Word every time, but we just talked about it in the type of things, in the type of situations that it's talking about in that Scripture. And you're going to see a little bit as we go on sharing some examples of how actually that looked. Now, we're not going to lay out how we conveyed all God's commands, but we're going to get really, really practical. Everything we talk about tonight is going to be rooted in a biblical principle, but we're not going to over-spiritualize things. We're going to get very, very practical in what we describe. It's going to be a little bit like the Proverbs, where just a lot of nuggets, maybe almost seemingly random things, hopefully some wisdom mixed into there, and hopefully out of that you're going to get some nuggets of things you can take and apply to relationships in your family. And if you're not a parent, you're a grandparent perhaps, the same things will apply in how you interact with your grandkids. If you're here tonight and those times are past you and we don't want you to feel, man, I've blown it, I can't do all this stuff now. Any ways that you interact with young people, ways that you interact with your parents, others, this will apply to how you handle yourself in a lot of different relationships.
And even though we weren't extremely structured in our routines, we were actually pretty particular about certain things.
Yeah, I know it's hard to believe that I'm particular about anything, but we had distinct parameters, priorities that we tried to set, things we tried to instill in our daughter. But and church involvement was central to that, not just because I was a pastor, because there were times I was out doing other things, and we were sitting where you're sitting, but we made that a priority. And in that regard, we were very deliberate at just how we carried on our everyday conversations, just trying to make the most of the time that we knew we had with our daughter. And that's the title of our message tonight, our teaching, is just making the most, because when it comes to raising godly families, you can't just wing it, you can't just leave it to chance and hope everything turns out fine. We need to make the most of our time. We need to make the most of the opportunities that God has given us. We need to make the most of the conversations that we have, even our resources. And so those are the things that we're going to talk about. And none of this is going to necessarily guarantee a smooth transition, because we've worked with a lot of families over the years and seen a lot of parents who did seemingly everything right, and their kids still went off the rails. And then there's others who did seem to wing it and were botching it half the time, and their kids still followed God. And so we don't want you to get the feeling this is all on you as a parent or grandparent or family member, because your kids are going to decide, make their choices. They're going to look at the path and choose what they're going to follow, and that's going to be in large part determine where they end up.
Because actually, we really believe what the Bible says, and it says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it.
Yeah, and Pastor August highlighted that. And they may be old, before they really come to their senses, some of them. They may take the long, hard way around in many ways. But I'm telling you, if you instill those things in them when they're young, and you put the truth there, it's pretty tough. They're going to have to come and confront that someday, and it's pretty difficult to ultimately walk away from things that you had instilled in you truth-wise when you were young.
And you may not see the fruit of your labor while your kids are still with you. But be faithful, make the most of the time that you have, and allow God to do what He's going to do in their lives.
Yeah, so let's pray and just ask God to help us make the most of this tonight. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to come together, and I pray that tonight we would be better people for the time we spent together. You'll just help us to grasp some very practical principles about how we interact with our families. And Lord, I pray that you would be glorified in everything we do. Help us to do things your way. And Lord, just let us make the most of this time we have tonight. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so the first thing, talking about making the most of your time.
I think the first thing you learn as a parent is that time goes really fast and you don't get it back. So you really need to make the most of the present.
Yeah, and that means being present. I remember several years ago we had a kind of an extended family trip. We went to Hawaii, and we were whale watching out on the boat one day, and they said that was the best day they had all year by the end of it. And I'm trying to capture all this footage with my video camera, and it's right there, man. I'm trying to get everything I could, go from one side of the boat to the other. And I don't think this dawned on me in the moment, but when I was watching that footage back, and I probably only done it once, maybe twice, I'm seeing this, and the camera's shaking. It's going from here to there. And I'm thinking, oh, that was pretty cool stuff. But I suddenly realized that I never saw any of it firsthand. I had my eye to that camera lens the whole time taking this in. And I could have put that aside and saw these huge things 3 and 4 feet from me, breaching the water, and tails come out, and all this stuff. But I wasn't right there in the moment. And in a lot of ways like that, we can look at life through a lot of lenses. We can look at life through and gauge it by our success at work. We can look at it through our favorite pastimes, through interaction with people, accumulating stuff, even all the opportunities and advantages we're trying to give our kids. And yet, are we really present? Are we really there in the moment? Because there will come a last time for everything with your kids and with your family members. There'll be a last time that child wants to jump up in your lap and read a story, a last time that they want to play a favorite game, a last time that they have a certain little bedtime routine. All that kind of stuff will come and go.
Eliana had a really sweet bedtime routine. You know, we'd tuck her in, say goodnight, and about a minute or so after we'd walk out of the room, she'd say, "Good night, Mommy. Good night, sweetie. I love you. I love you too. I'll see you in the morning. I'll see you in the morning." And then in about another minute or two, it was Carey's turn.
Yep, out of the darkness comes the voice. Say, "Good night, Daddy. Good night, Eliana. See you in the morning." And we're kind of like, and we got a little bit of a kick out of that. And I think we kind of took a time like that for granted. But there came a time where all of a sudden one night she doesn't do it. And a little surprise. And then a couple nights. And then she starts again. And then it might go for a few days and a week. And suddenly you begin to realize that someday that's not going to happen anymore. Now, a lot of times we see coming. You know when it's their last football game. You know when it's their last concert. You know the day they graduate and all those things. But most of those last times, you never really know when they're taking place. They just stop. They just never happen again. And we need to really savor those times while they're with us and understand that those things aren't going to last. And it's the same thing with parents and others in your family. There's going to be a last time when you're able to say, "I love you" to one of your loved ones. There's going to be a last time when maybe a parent with diminishing faculties will even recognize who you are. And so we need to make sure that we make the most of that time with our family members, with the people we love, while they still want it.
And especially while your kids still want to do things with you, because there's going to come a time they're going to grow up and they're going to be busy and they're not going to have time for you, or they just won't be around. So don't miss what's right in front of you every single day.
Yeah, even if you have a good relationship, those times are going to come to an end. And on the other end of the spectrum, not just being in the moment with those immediate things, but also making sure that the things you're prioritizing and teaching them are showing them what's going to be important in the long run. Man, our kids are so busy these days. They're in all kinds of stuff. And I mean, I was in things. I was in sports activities in school, Lorri the same way. And I'll be honest with you, I was a good student, but probably the most formative things in my school years were the activities I was in, the sports, the other things. So I'm not discounting any of those things. Let your kids try stuff and get them into it. But I think sometimes we can get so busy with that and take up 3 or 4 nights a week, and they're traveling and they're in leagues and all of this stuff. And I mean, how many of our kids are going to be professional athletes? How many of our kids are even going to go out next year with what they were into this year? And I think in the back of our mind, we kind of have the subtle idea that, we got to do this stuff while they can, and the church will always be there for them. But if we don't set the priorities now and show them this is really the priority, these other things can work around that if they need to. We can't take for granted the fact they're just going to stick with it later in life. We've seen too many families go by the wayside because they gave their kids all kind of opportunities. But the things that really are going to matter most in the end, the things you're going to want to see them stick with, the things you're going to want your grandkids a part of, are not going to be a part of their life because you didn't make that a priority when they were with you.
And one of the things that we chose as a family to help prioritize, and we realize this is not practical or even possible for a lot of people, especially if you're a single parent. But I stepped away from working outside of the home when Eliana was just a couple of months old, and I did that until she was about 11 or 12. And we just lived on a lot less during those years. We gave up certain things that we just didn't think were as important, and then I was able to be home with her. I was able to take her to school, and we were to pray together. And when she got home, when she went to talk about her day, I was right there. Or just when she had days off, that was kind of a choice that we made as a family.
Yeah, and we know not everybody can do that, but regardless of what your schedule is, find a way to use the times that you do have. Use meal times, use those travel times, use times that sometimes you even have to create that. Because you need to make sure that you're there as much as possible. And regardless of what your schedule is, it's going to take some sacrifice. Because time is a limited commodity. It's a resource that if you're going to use it for something, it's probably coming away from something else. And make sure that you put it toward what's really worth it.
And change your schedule as much as you can. I know that's not always easy, but be there for their activities, for their events, and let them know that they are actually a priority for you. And just get creative in how you involve them. I mean, it can even just be the daily tasks. Bring them along with you and do things with them. I remember I'd look out the window and I was like, okay, where's Eliana? I know she's outside somewhere with Carey, and there they are. He's pushing the lawnmower with one hand and carrying her in the other one.
That's how I got so jacked, as you can see it. One hand in mowing. But yeah, now some people looked at them, that wasn't very responsible, but she just wanted to be with me. Mm-hmm. So I figured out a time, if that's all I had, that I'm going to at least take a few steps with her and let her be there.
And don't pass those times up, especially when they're the ones who initiate it, because again, those times won't last forever, and they're not going to ask you to do those in the future.
Yeah, some of you are old enough, remember the old Cats in the Cradle song, and the kids want to do these things with you, and like, yeah, we're going to do that at some point, we're going to do this and that. There's going to come a day, even if they have a good relationship, where they're just not going to be there to do those things. So use that while you can, and be present. And this applies when they get older too. Some of your adult children, if they want to stop by or maybe even suggest that you take a vacation together or you do that with them, make sure you continue to, as much as you can accommodate, you won't always be able to, but make sure you make every effort to spend those kind of times with them.
Actually, after Eliana moved to D.C., we talked every day, of course, and we texted back and forth a lot of times and stuff like that. But we made a definitive choice to once a week, we got on a Zoom call, we could see each other face to face, and then we would talk about just what was going on in her life. We did a Bible study together, so we were still connecting relationally and we were connecting spiritually.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have happened had she not established that pattern when she was younger. And so as kids get older, whether they'll admit it or not, there's things they want to hang on to a little bit of those days, and that was a special time for her then. So when she moved away, hey, can we make a time? I used to go to Drake for lunch. I tried once a week. She wanted to just go through a little bit of study with me because we'd established those kind of patterns when she was young. But you need to start then, and you need to make sure that you prioritize that time with your family, because time encompasses opportunities. And that's the second thing we want to dwell on for just a little bit, maybe even for the most of tonight, is make the most of your opportunities. Because opportunities represent teachable moments. Those kind of things that just come up in the course of everyday interaction, maybe out of specific situations, or opportunities to teach an important lesson, to help them develop a character trait, to teach a life skill, to help them gain a new perspective they wouldn't have had otherwise. Those are all kind of teachable moments.
And maybe not even just something for right in that moment, but something they're going to use somewhere else down the road.
Yeah, almost anything you want to teach them is kind of casting out there. We want them to get this instilled in them. And it's easy to overlook those kind of things. If you're not intentional about using life situations to teach life lessons, they can come by.
And not just the spiritual things. I mean, sometimes they're just life skills or their character development that help them grow and to be godly people.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff that is biblical in principle. And here's the thing. The spiritual is the practical. I hope, again, you're not disappointed because we're not tying a Bible verse to everything we're talking about. But all these are ways that God, just like the Scripture said, interacting with them as they go along and teaching those things and helping to learn those important lessons, because spiritual is practical, and you can get all the Bible knowledge that you can handle, but if you're not doing anything with it, if you're not putting those principles into practice, it really is not going to make a difference in the way you live. And those teachable moments are those times when those principles intersect with real life. And that can take a lot of different forms. Some teachable moments arise very intentionally. Others are kind of unexpected.
Sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative.
Yeah, I mean, a negative teachable moment, for example, could be when your kids are really little, they're always with you when you're going to play. They're in the car. And how you act when you're in the car is a teachable moment, for good or for bad. I've had a lot of people come to me and talk to me, sometimes kind of humorous at first, other time not. But man, my kid the other day just said something, and I'm like, where did that come from? And then you realize, oh, I think they might have heard me do this. And sometimes that's not a good thing, but kids are like parrots. They're gonna say what they've heard, and they're gonna repeat that. And they're not above using your example as an excuse for bad behavior in their own life if they need to.
And sometimes the more spontaneous things happen, that's the best times to have the conversation. You know, they're going to come to you and they're trying to make a decision, or they've just got a question about something. Those are some of the best moments to teach them something in the situation and for the future as well.
Yeah, any question or any choice they have to make is a teachable moment. And I mean, from the earliest age, from the first time a kid can start talking, they got one particular question more than the other on their mind. One word. What are your kids just incessantly asking you? Yeah, why, you know? And again, that's not a question. But that why is something that I don't think we ever stop asking that. In our relationship with God, when things are happening, we want to honor God. Why is this happening? You know, what can I learn from this is the best question, but we want to understand why. Now, if you're from our generation at all, and maybe this is still carried on, your parents had a quick reply to that. They didn't waste much time, but if you had your question and you're saying, well, why? Why do I got to do this? Why are you telling me to? What was the response they gave? Yeah, because I said so. Now, neither Lorri and I were rebellious kids. But I'm going to be honest with you, that never really set well to me. That answer wasn't good enough for me. And as a parent, I've always tried to explain the why. I wanted them to understand the rationale behind what I was asking them to do. And even as a pastor, I always try to explain that reasoning, because I want people to understand the principle behind the action or expectation that maybe even God has of us. Because if you don't do that, that's when it does become just like a bunch of legalistic rules, and that almost, by human nature, invites rebellion.
Well, and honestly, if you ask your kids to do something, or you ask them not to do something, and you can't explain why to them, you might need to rethink that yourself.
Yeah, even if you don't say that to them, you should understand. But most of the time, helping them understand what that reasoning is. And it's going to make a lot more sense, because if we just told Eliana, you know, you can't go these places here, and you can't dress that way, and you need to do this just because we told you, without any explanation. I mean, she wasn't rebellious either, but she was very inquisitive and strong-willed, and if she didn't understand why, all that's going to be is kind of confusing, and it's not really going to be in her of why we've asked that, and she's not going to understand it someday to maybe teach her kids.
When she was in middle school, the sweatpants and the yoga pants with the words along the back came out. And she had a pair or two of those, and she's like, hey, these are great. And we're like, yeah, they are, but you can only wear them at home. You can't wear them at school. And she's like, why? All my friends are wearing them. Why can't I wear them to school? So we had a little conversation back and forth and talked about it. And finally, we just asked her, is that where you really want to draw people's attention to?
Yeah, you just got really practical. I mean, you got words on your backside. Words are meant to be read, so is that where people need to be gawking all the time? And from there, it wasn't hard to reason that, well, God probably wouldn't prefer that either. And it began to make sense with her, at least on some level. And so we didn't have to really deal with that type of thing much more when we explained it in those type of ways. But teachable moments are not just in the form of questions or maybe even explanations for things, but a lot of times we've got to kind of create those moments because it really comes down to just having a lot of shared experiences.
It does, and remember to have fun and to laugh. Have your own private jokes, because it's sometimes in those moments where they have a lot of emotion that they remember those, and those have the biggest impact on them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big laugh out loud sort of person. I get kind of goofy, but I'm getting more of a dry way. But we laughed a lot. We did goofy things, and things that would embarrass you in public, but we just did them. But we involved that emotion because even the secular media knows a lot of the cultural agendas that happen today started out like in sitcoms and other things where they grab a hold of your emotion one day. They get you laughing at something. They get your emotions stirred. And if they know that that's the way that people really become engaged, and make sure you're having a good time with your kids.
Even from a young age. I mean, do stuff with them. Read with them. Play with them. Do their homework with them. There's not any more teachable moment than doing homework.
Yeah, as youth pastors, we were amazed at how many of our younger kids their parents never sat down and read with them, never helped them with homework or anything like that. And that's, even apart from spiritual stuff, that's formative years. You've got to take those kind of times with your kids. But not even in those planned, structured times, but be spontaneous with those teachable moments. One of the things you really capitalize, and this will even help kind of avert bad behavior sometimes, when you can draw kids' attention to things that they're inquisitive of. I mean, their inquisitive nature. And our extended family will tell you, I've got kind of a unique rapport with all the kids in our family, and even some of the kids at church here, because I made a deliberate effort to cater to their curiosity. And from the time they were babies, I'd take them and I'd, just not hold them. I'd take them on little treks around the house, or I'd take them outside and they're under the tree and we'd pull a leaf down and yank it off and they'd get to touch it. Or if I saw a bug, hey, look at this thing here. And just drawing their attention to stuff like that and inviting their curiosity. I bought a pump the other day for balloon animals, so when the family's together I can make balloon animals because that kind of engages them. Or you guys have seen me around with my puppets. I started getting those because I wanted to engage kids, because they want to interact with their surroundings, and believe it or not, they want to interact with you.
Yep. And Carey used to take Eliana around the block. We had a pretty big block, and she'd come home with frogs, turtles. The biggest one was when she was 4 and was carrying a snake, and I came around the corner and she's holding a snake in the living room, and I'm screaming and she's laughing, Or she wanted to ride to the dump because she got to see the horses along the way. Or he went to the pet store with her every couple of weeks so she could get her puppy fix, which ended up working in my favor.
I knew their family didn't have any animals. I thought maybe my only way is I can instill a love of critters in my daughter, which sure enough I did. And when they all got old enough, all the nieces and nephews got dogs. But then she got too busy for it at med school, so now we end up with it, and I've got my dog. So there was a method to my madness. I'm not sure if I had that plan. But, as they get older, that same thing of making sure you're just including them in day-to-day stuff and stuff that's going to capture their attention. Because you get to those formative, kind of awkward junior high years when they're just looking to fit in somewhere and who they are and what's their crowd. If you're one of the people in their life who's made sure to include them and involve them in stuff, they're going to have a pretty hard time putting you off, because they don't get that from enough other sources.
And another really easy way is just bring them along with you, whatever you're doing. I know Pastor Luke mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Judah helped him helped him put a chair together, Just doing those things with them together. Eliana and I love to bake and to cook and housework. Well, maybe not housework so much, but cooking and baking.
Got me out of a lot of it.
And those are things that she loves to do today, and we talk about those. And so, those are some great moments. Just bring them along, and they're learning stuff at the same time.
Because when they're little, they want to do stuff with you. Now, some of you are beyond that. They don't necessarily want to do as much with you. Find things that they do want to do. Find ways to do it with them. Enter into their activities. But here's the thing. Teach those kind of life skill things from an early age, because I remember helping Eliana. She got a little bit older, and she's working on term papers and doing speeches. And I helped her learn how to craft an outline to put your thoughts around and bring things together a little easier than just a bunch of random stuff. And to this day, even in med school, when her colleagues are struggling to make presentations, she'll say, "Dad, I learned to make those outlines from you," and it really helps her.
I think, too, with one child, it was probably a little bit different for us, but we took Eliana with us pretty much wherever we went. So she went car shopping with us multiple times. So her and her husband were just here last week, and they bought a car, and she learned how to do that by going with us and just watching as we did it as well.
Yeah, the staff knows how I dick her deal on that, and she got that from me. Now, not every kid wants to be there, but she wanted to, so we let her be there, and she saw how this was transacted, and she's kept those skills. But when you teach those kind of things, don't underestimate what they're going to glean from you just by hanging out and doing things with you. You're conducting business. You're planning something. You're discussing some deep things that you might think are above them. And as long as it's appropriate, bring them in on there, because those shared experiences, especially when they learn something while they're at it, build a bond that's going to carry into adulthood, because every time that they apply that skill, it's like you're there with them in a way. And someday when you're not there with them, that'll evoke good memories of the times you were, and hopefully someday they're going to teach some of those same things to their kids.
And don't just necessarily focus on what you can teach them. Think about what things they can teach you, because they do have something to offer.
Yeah, and it says an awful lot, and it will build a lot into your relationship when you're willing to humble yourself and ask for their help, or let them teach you things. Let them know that as old as you are, you still got things to learn. And, so from a very early age, just involve them in that kind of stuff. Ask, the show and tell thing. Get that habit started where hey, what did you learn today? Show me that stuff. And as they get older, let them begin to teach you things and show you how to do, because they'll glean things that you don't know how to do, and they'll be able to help you along the way.
And that's important even as they get older. A couple years ago, I had a really tough situation at work, and I was going into a meeting that was really hard. I was really, really struggling. I talked to Carey and my parents and my sisters, and Eliana said, "Mom, can I share something with you?" And I said, "Sure." And so when she did, it was like this peace just came over me. God had given her the words to give to me for that particular moment. And I know if I hadn't spoken with her, I probably wouldn't have gotten that. And that was just such a great moment where she was actually feeding a whole lot into my life that even everybody else had done that, but there was something unique about what she offered. And it was a game changer for me in that meeting.
Yeah, and if you start letting them do a little of that even when they're younger and feeling they've got something to contribute to you, I remember I remember that time, and it's amazing what they'll kind of say back to you that you thought, man, I don't know if they ever learned that from me, but they have just a lot of insight. And they talk a lot on the phone about that type of stuff. But if your situation with your kids, I'm going to give you one other thing before we close along the same line, about if your relationship is strained, this is one of the ways where you can begin to build some bridges and chip away at some of the walls that are there. And that is when you're willing to reach out and ask them for help or advice. Not prying into their life, trying to tell them what to do, but letting them speak into yours. And if they're ever able to do that, make sure that appreciation, you lavish it on them. You thank them for that time. And that goes a long way to building back a relationship that may be kind of sour.
And if you ever do something wrong or you blow it, be very quick to apologize, because that by itself will really build trust in your relationship.
Yeah, and that lesson alone, because they're going to hit times too, and if they've seen that you're quick to do that, it's going to make a difference. Because anytime when you're trying to teach these life lessons, especially when it involves character issues, your example is the key. It's going to hinge on that. You can say all kinds of stuff, but if you're not living it, that's just going to turn in the other direction. If you're trying to teach them honesty and integrity, and they know that, you called in sick to take the day off, and even I'm going to spend it with you, and you're defeating your purpose in that sort of thing if you're not living the lesson as well as just telling them about it.
And even your language, especially when you're mad or you're frustrated or whatever, how do you talk to people and how do you talk about people?
Yeah, because that's your conversation, or how do you interact with them? Are you impatient? Are you harsh? Do your words build people up or they kind of tear them down? Are you complaining about that? That's a big one. Learning to teach them contentment in life with what they have. Well, they're not going to be that way if they hear you complaining more than they hear you praising or just talking in uplifting ways.
And let them watch you be a giver, whether it's to other people or to God. Talk about your tithing. How do you use your money? Let them see how you're using your money that you've earned.
Yeah, and one of the most important lessons they need to learn has to do with teaching them consideration for other people. My dad was probably the most influential person in my life. Didn't live very long, but I can't remember a time that we were going to church that he wasn't picking somebody up from the nursing home, or literally the lady around town who's carrying the garbage bag and picking up the cans everywhere. We took her and her daughter to church. If my dad knew of somebody in my class at school who was from a family where they're kind of the ostracized people, they didn't look good, they didn't smell good, whatever, he made sure that we pulled them into things that we were doing with our family. One of the times that really stood out to me, and at the time it didn't make as much sense, but I had just come off, I had won the conference wrestling tournament, and I'd been riding high, and the very next week, I lost in the dual meet to a guy who didn't come anywhere close to me in that tournament, and I was bumming. I was in the lowest. I was moping. I was the last guy out of the locker room, and going out of the gym, and my dad was with me. And on the other side of the gym, walking out, he must have not gone on the bus home. They were about an hour and a half away. He must have came with. It looked like it was his dad or grandfather, but just kind of a haggard, older-looking guy. And honestly, I think my dad got the impression that they probably didn't have a whole lot. And my dad says to me, he said, you know what? That guy probably needed that a lot more than you did. You might have just had one more notch in your thing, but that might have made his whole season having that time, and you just never know. And I'm like, man, whose side are you on here? That's the enemy there. But I understood and began to see my dad was always pointing me to look at ways, even if it involved me, that somebody else might need something, even at a cost to me, and to always put others first.
I think both of our parents taught us that, to just be considerate of other people. Look at their situations. Look at where they're coming from. How are your actions affecting them? And just to always look out for them. Look for the loner in a group. Look for the person that everybody else overlooks. And reach out to those people and put other people first.
Yeah, and make sure you instill that above it. Now, one way that I do say we need to put the focus on our kids, not in a selfish way, but we need to make sure that we let kids develop their own personality. We're not imposing ourselves on them in that way. We're not imposing our preferences, our idiosyncrasies. We're wanting to teach them things, explaining along the way. But make sure we don't do that, because there are things that, being in your household, having your DNA, that they're going to tend to do a little bit the same way. We all recognize that. But some of those things we're wise enough to know that, man, I hope maybe they're a little more balanced than I was, or maybe a little more perspective. And so, for example, I'm a perfectionist, and Eliana tends to be the same way. So believe it or not. So from an early age, I had to make sure that when she's not picking at things like I would, that I didn't jump in and say, hey, this, or try to fix it for her, or if she's, making a little bit more of a mess than I would, or she's just being more laid back than I would about something. I wasn't quick to jump in and try to correct that, because I knew she'd be better off if she didn't get that into my personality.
I did not like animals. We didn't grow up with animals. I hate bugs, spiders, anything like that. But she had an affinity for those from the time she was little. So I had to remove myself so she wasn't petrified of bugs. And she eventually had a pet spider, so that was his area. But, I had to step away from what I felt so that she could grow and be what she wanted to be.
Believe it or not, that even fed into what she does with the medical stuff. But, and to this day, here's the thing. If Eliana catches a lizard or sees a praying mantis or something, she takes a picture, no words, just sends it to me. And we have that bond over a very, very simple thing. Again, appealing to that inquisitive nature.
Just remember, the more positive and enriching their experiences are with you, the deeper your bond's going to be, both now and in the future.
Yeah, and if they look at time with you as at least a little bit of a sense of adventure, they're gonna want to be with you. And the aim of all that is to just keep those lines of communication open so you can continue to speak into their lives as they get older. And that's the last point we just want to hit briefly, is making the most of those conversations, because that's really going to be what lingers in the years ahead.
And while we weren't really structured as far as our routines or anything like that, we were very intentional with our conversations and pretty much talked about everything. Yeah. Nothing was really off limits.
Yeah, I mean, within reason, there are things maybe not quite ready for, or, gossiping around them and stuff. But yeah, we talked about all kinds of stuff.
We talked about faith and friends and money, and he even talked about boys, and we talked about politics and dating and future mates and school and dreams and just almost everything.
Yeah, and again, we don't have any secrets for you. Just like the scripture said, talking about stuff, that's most of what we instilled in here. Something comes up, we hear something on the radio, something went on at school, something's in the news, whatever, we're going places. We're talking about that. We're talking through stuff. We're tying it back to biblical principle, and that made a huge difference in her life. Because what's happening is you're not so much teaching them what to think, but you're teaching them how to think. You're teaching them by letting them in on those conversations and involving them and listening to them. You're teaching them how to process things for themselves. And the more capable and confident they feel in their communication, that's going to suit them very well in their education later, their job prospects, all kinds of things, interacting with other people. And that habit of interaction with people stood out so much to Eliana's friends, even those who had good relationships with parents, that, man, they would tell us that you guys talk about everything. And so they even enjoyed talking with us about things that maybe they didn't get into with their parents.
Yeah, and some of them didn't have great relationships with their parents, and some of them did. Some of them didn't come from a Christian background. So we just made that door open. We talked to her enough, and then she talked to her friends, and they felt comfortable talking to us. And we missed that. We loved being with her friends.
Some of them still, to this day, will come and talk to us about stuff. We didn't make ourselves obnoxious to being, but we just enjoyed being with them. Because we understood that one of the biggest factors in where a kid ends up in life and what route they take has to do with the company they keep. I remember one youth person who years ago used to say, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future." That makes a huge difference in where they end up. And so the best way to kind of keep at least some tabs on that while they're growing up, not in an intrusive way necessarily, but to make your place the place, or at least one of the places where your kids and their friends like to hang out.
So keep your home open. I mean, I have fixed more food for more people than I can even count. More parties, birthday parties, events, pre-prom dinners, everything. We made a place for them to come, and we wanted them to come to our house.
Get a game room of some sorts downstairs,
a fire pit,
darts, other things. The fire pit outside. Man, that stuff during our high school and college years just got tons and tons of use, and now it sits kind of dormant. Yeah. But we were that place. And we made sure to get to know their parents of the kids. We'd invite them or go to their house and plan events together, do things. When we run into an event, we made sure that we got to know them. So we had a little bit of an inroad in
Carey even got to play in their little band. He was pretty excited about that.
I did what?
You played in their band.
Yeah, man, I played the bass in a little band, believe it or not. I'm going to be up here one of these days. But yeah, and when they're with their friends, especially when they're young, when they get older, they don't necessarily want this, but they're young, kind of make note of how they interact. I mean, one time you kind of got an Eliana, not in a scolding way, but it was kind of important to teach this.
She had a couple friends over. She was probably 5 or 6. And when they went home, I was like, do you know you told them the entire time they were here what to do, what to say, how to play? I'm like, if you keep doing that, you are not going to have any friends, because nobody wants to be with somebody who's bossy all the time.
That may be good leadership skills on some level, but for the most part, and just asking the question again, a lot of questions, do you want us to tell you everything to do? Well, no. Well, they don't want that either. And using that as a little opportunity to talk about cooperation with people and just getting along, because that's definitely going to suit her well throughout her life.
We also helped her learn how to interact with not only her peers, but with other adults, to be polite. When an adult is speaking to you, you look at them. When they shake your hand, give them a handshake. Just to really give them your attention and learn how to interact with an adult.
Yeah, we made a deliberate point to involve her in those adult conversations. 'Cause I go through the foyer here a lot, and I'll see sometimes you'll address a kid and they won't pay much attention to you, or us as adults, we don't give them attention, we just pass by. And learning that interaction And as a kid, that stood out to adults. They just were kind of amused sometimes at how she would enter into conversations with them. And I remember when we were in Springfield, the National Youth Director at the time had a daughter about the age of Eliana. And Eliana stayed overnight with them one night. And the next morning, when all the other kids were sleeping, Eliana got up and went out on the deck with the mother, and she's telling us this, and just had an adult conversation with her when she was like 9. And it just was really funny to her. But we taught her to do that. And just a couple weeks ago, she told us that the med school class was working with one of the top pediatricians in the nation, and each of them got a chance to do part of the rounds with the parents who had brought in their kids. And they said that Eliana was the only one who not only interacted with the parent, but engaged the kids in conversation about what was going on. And that was because we made a deliberate effort to make sure that she knew how to interact on every level. And that's something you can't necessarily take for granted. It just gets instilled in people.
And it's amazing how many teens and young adults don't know how to interact socially. So you're going to give your kids a leg up if you'll take the time to help them to learn some critical social development.
Yeah, and kind of along that line of just interacting with young and old, don't underestimate what even little kids can glean from conversations with you, or
even spiritual things they grasp sometimes.
Yeah, the depth of understanding that they'll have and maybe say back to you. Eliana when she was little, she loved books. She'd rather get a book than a toy, and she'd open a new one up and stick her. She loved to sniff them. I'm not quite sure why. But the most fascinating book to her on my bookshelf was the Mayo Medical Family book. It was like 3 or 4 inches thick, and that was huge. So that fast, and she'd pull it off the shelf, and she was just 3 or 4, and she'd look at the pictures, and then she'd ask me questions about it. Well, I could have easily passed that off, but I thought, well, I'll indulge her here. And so I would try to answer on the best I could for a 3 or 4-year-old and explain what was going on, and she seemed content and go on her way. I thought, well, whatever that was worth. And then later, I know sometimes I'd hear her in the kitchen explaining something to her mom, on a 3 or 4-year-old level, but she got a lot more out of it.
3 or 4-year-old was my level.
And now today she's at Mayo Clinic conducting research that will contribute. You never know how that stuff turns out. But making sure you take time, even at church here, in Pastor Courtney's area, even down to Pastor Bree, working with the kids, the stuff they get at that young age, don't underestimate what they're going to take from those things.
On the other side of that, don't overestimate their readiness to take on a responsibility or to make certain decisions just because they have the ability to understand what you're telling them.
Yeah, they're not always ready to make the decision with the information they had. When I was a youth pastor, I'd have parents come to me all the time and say they're having trouble with their kids, making the decisions they're making, not wanting to go to church, whatever, and say, Pastor Carey, I don't know what to do. My kid's 13 years old. They're going to make their own decisions, And I'm thinking, man, how many of us were ready to make life's most important decisions when we were 13 years old? And I had to help them understand that people who grow up to make good decisions, to be good leaders, don't do that because you let them right from day one that they could make a choice. Do it. They learn that by up to a time seeing a responsible adult, seeing you make those decisions for them. Like Pastor August got him this morning, you're going to church with us here, and explain why, explain the practicality, but you make those decisions, and then gradually, as they have a responsibility, you start to turn over. Usually between like 12 and 13 and 20, you're going to have a lot of passing off of decisions, and all of a sudden, okay, you've seen what we prefer, and you know why? You can make your own decision in this. And they'll make it with a lot more thoughtful if you showed them along the way how to do that.
And that's actually really what our goal is, isn't it? I mean, we want to help them learn to make their own decisions, to develop and get their own viewpoints, to get their own opinions. And that's going to stretch them, and it's going to stretch you too. I mean, when Eliana came and told me she wanted to go to D.C., I was like, no, no, it's 2020. It's COVID. She'd already talked to her dad.
COVID, politics.
All the stuff going on. But as we started to talk, and she started to tell me why she wanted to go and the reasons and how it fit with her plans. And when she said to me, Mom, I really think this is what God wants me to do. And I was like, okay. But we had to be able to have a conversation about that, and so she was learning to stretch herself, which was stretching me at the same time.
Yeah, and again, letting them inform you. Here's why I'm doing this, and just listening, not trying to speak and to give them all kinds of direction when they're older, but continue to let them talk things through with you, just like you did, hopefully, with them when they were younger. And if you're in the habit of keeping things from your kids, and I mean, there's things that you do that with, But be as open as you can, especially as they get older, because if they feel somehow you're keeping things from them, there's a little bit where they wonder if you trust them with that information. You know, if grandpa and grandma start having something in their life and you think, I don't want to bring my kids in on this, you've got to let your kids in on that, because what happens, even if you have a good relationship later, if you're not in the habit of just being open with those, then they're not necessarily going to feel a big need to let you in on what's going on in their life as they get older. And as a parent, you know, you don't have to have all the answers for everything, but just make sure you keep that door open. Now, you guys still talk, you more than I do all the time. Yeah. We text more often. But Eliana calls, doesn't always want advice, doesn't want answers, but because we established that, she'll just call somebody just to talk. You can almost put the phone down, and she's talking through whatever she's doing because she got in that habit when she was little. And just do your best. Keep up with the culture. If you don't understand something, get into it, because we want to be able to address the things they're going through. But understand that you might have some things to learn from them and let them speak into your life. Again, no secrets. If I could just say two general things. We did pretty much everything together, especially if she wanted to do it. We let her in on it to be there. And we talked about everything we possibly could, and we always tied it back to something about why God would want this from us. And that's what's made the difference in her life. Eliana, to this day, pulls people around her all the time. She's discipling. She can get into conversations with people on a deep scientific level and talk biblical things with things that I hear. And it's like, man, she's way ahead of where I was. And some of it I recognize, and others she's taken because we taught her how to process those things that they got just by talking about everything. When you're lying down, rising up, going along the way.
Well, you brought your kids into this world, so be willing to share it with them.
Yeah, let them in on it.
It's a good journey.
I want to just close with one thing, and if you don't get anything else, this thing may be the most practical thing that will help you. If you've got a great relationship, this will only enhance it. But this is one thing that people come to me, and I have a lot of people come and say, I don't have a good relationship with my kids. I'm always brutally honest with them, and I tell them that's probably not going to change anytime soon. That's going to be a process. But one of the things you can start doing with your kids that will begin to mend those fences is begin to be an encourager in their life. When they're little, catch them doing things right. You can have a kid that's messing up 95% of the time, and they're getting in trouble all the time, and they're used to you getting on them for that. Surprise them sometimes. Look for that 1, 2, 5% where they're doing something great, where they did something really well with a skill they have, where they maybe reached out and showed consideration for someone, where they helped you in a way maybe you didn't even ask or you did ask, and hone in on that thing and commend them for them. Praise them for it. Say, man, I'm proud of you for doing that. As a youth pastor, Becky McIntosh, who I met when we started the church here, designed a couple cards for me. One was a girl version, one was a guy, and it was me, kind of a caricature of a youth pastor, sneaking up behind the person, and their books were flying out of the thing, and it just said, I caught you on the front. And on the back, it said, doing something great. And it hardly had any space to write. But I jot something there. A great game the other night. Great what you did at youth group the other night. Thanks for doing this. Man, they brought that to youth group with them. Pastor Carey, I got this. Now, we may not be doing hard copies, but a text, whatever. But here's the deal. Here's why that will build a bridge with you. Most of us don't get that kind of encouragement. I can tell you, kids have very few sources where they get that kind of encouragement. And if one of those main sources is you, they're going to have an awful hard time putting you off. They're going to have an awful hard time shutting you out of their life because you're the one who speaks life and encouragement, catching them doing something right, and being that encourager. Be their biggest cheerleader. And that's going to go a long ways to make it a great relationship even better, and maybe a tough relationship of building back some of those bridges. Call your adult children. Ask them for some input on stuff. Tell them you're proud of things that they're doing, even if it's just that little bit. And that's going to go a long ways of that. Now, tonight, we just want to close with this, and I know it's a little bit late, but when we linger at the altars, we're here a little bit beyond this time, and I'm just going to ask, maybe tonight, if you'll just give a few minutes to this before you go. And we've got a few things that I want to bring up, and Lorri and I are going to be here. We'll be here at the altars, and if pastors see that there are others here, if you've got something specific you want to pray about, we're not going to pry into your life. You may tell us what it is or not. We want to be here to pray with you, but I want to give you just a few minutes to kind of linger on some of these things. And we have that last slide there. And I'm not going to walk through, you can read these things, but I want you just to take a few moments and out of this to take something really practical. I mean, if you're there with your wife and you can talk about this, if you're single, you might be thinking of just doing something for another family member or a loved one with one of these. But first of all, ask God to just help you recognize teachable moments. And maybe right now you'll think of some times you maybe haven't capitalized on, but ask God to help you recognize those when they come. And then this is real practical. Think of and set a time for a shared experience. Maybe you already know something your kids love to do. If it's just you and your spouse, even tonight, get something on the agenda. Say, hey, you know what? We've been thinking about this. Let's just do this. And make a plan to have a shared experience with your kids or some members of your family. What can you ask them to do with you or help you with? Or maybe what you need to learn and you can ask them. Think of something very specific that you can ask them to be involved. Especially if you got a little kid. You could do it yourself, but ask them to be on it with you. What I just said, compliment them for something. Think of something very specific in their life. Maybe even tonight that you can commend them for. Say you're proud of before bedtime, something you notice in their life, and give them that compliment. Again, if you're single, think of this among another family. Grandparents, you can handle yourself the same with parents, with your grandkids, or even your adult kids, some of this stuff. This is a big one. Confess a shortfall to maybe right now before you go, there's a way you kind of failed and you just want to confess it to one and say, man, we haven't been quite doing this. We need to shore this up, and maybe even offer an apology to your kids for something. That'll really make an impression on them, believe me. And then when you pick up your kids tonight, start getting this, ask them to show and tell you what they learned. If they've got something in their hand, man, what is that? Have them tell you about it and instruct you a little bit. Oh, man, I didn't know that. And really give them a chance to do, because that's where you start building in that habit of letting them speak into your life and being involved in every aspect. So that's something you can practice even as you get them tonight. But I just want, if we've got some music we could just put on, I just want to give you a few minutes. Look at this list. Maybe you just want to take a picture of it. At some point, put some real practical stuff to this, and come away with something tonight that you can do, to plan to do together with your family, that you can appreciate them for, that you can learn from them, whatever you can do, and just start putting some of this into practice. It's not profound. Just as you go along your day, let God show you the times you can interact, what you can say, talk about everything you can, teach kids how to process things, and just be there with them. If you're in their life to that degree, not intrusive, but there when they want your attention, they're going to let you into their life a lot more frequently in the years to come. So take a few moments just to process this with you and God. Let Him speak to you. And if you have a need tonight, particularly family related, we want to just pray with you and ask God to help you through it. He's given your kids to you, and He's trusting you to raise them. And I don't say that as a burden. I say that He knows you're the one He's chosen to raise that child. And if you're struggling and need some help, we're in this together, and we'd love to pray with you. So let's just spend a few moments before we go. And when you go tonight, hey, have an encouraging word for your kid when you pick them up.